For more content like this, please hit like and subscribe. Echoes of the Kingdom, the Sermon on the Mount, Part 3, Jesus' relationship to the law and the prophets, Matthew 5:17 through 48. Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not one letter, not one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all is accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commandments and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does them and teaches them will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. So many Christians lack even the most basic familiarity with the Old Testament that they do not even see Jesus' connection to Judaism. And if they can see the connection, they cannot say what it means. Judaism and the story of the Old Testament are the context for understanding Jesus. He is the chief character and the glue that holds the plot together. He did not come to start a new competing religion called Christianity. He came to bring the story of Israel and her God to a conclusion. For this section, we're going to let quite a few of our panelists speak. Dean Kingsbury. Kingsbury would observe that Matthew presents Jesus not as a lawbreaker, but as the authoritative interpreter of the Torah. Fulfilling the law does not mean discarding it, but bringing it to its intended purpose in the kingdom of heaven. Kingsbury would see this as a narrative continuity with Matthew's portrayal of Jesus as the new Moses, teaching from the mountain, not replacing the Torah, but revealing its true meaning. The greater righteousness Jesus demands is an inward, transformative, and ultimately relational standing with God. Amy-Jill Levine. Levine would be deeply attentive to Jesus' relationship to the Jewish law. She would stress that Jesus does not abolish the law. This would have been shocking and offensive to Jewish audiences. Rather, he fulfills the Greek word plerou. It should be read in light of the Jewish traditions of prophetic interpretation and intensification of the law's ethical demands. Levine would argue that Jesus remains within the orbit of Jewish Torah faithfulness, calling for obedience, but internalized obedience. She might also highlight that righteousness exceeding the Pharisees would not mean rejecting them, but going beyond legal minimalism toward radical integrity. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, in The Cost of Discipleship, sees this passage as Jesus' challenge to cheap grace. Fulfillment of the law means taking it more seriously, not less. The disciple does not bypass the law, but lives it more deeply through the heart, not just behavior. Bonhoeffer emphasizes that Jesus demands a visible, obedient community whose righteousness is marked by mercy, truth, and self-sacrifice. The call to greater righteousness is a call to the cruciformed life, one that cannot be hidden or faked. Richard Bauckham. Bauckham would likely read this as Jesus placing himself at the center of Israel's story. Fulfilling the law and the prophets means that Jesus brings their trajectory to completion. He doesn't replace them, but actualizes them. Bauckham would connect this to the eschatological hope. The law pointed towards God's justice, and now in Jesus that justice is being realized in the renewed people of God. The greater righteousness is covenantal faithfulness infused with divine mercy, not legal superiority. N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright would strongly agree that Jesus is not abolishing the Torah, but revealing its true kingdom-centered meaning. For Wright, Jesus fulfills the law the way a flower fulfills a seed, bringing it to its full purpose. This is about the climax of Israel's story. The kingdom of God is not the negation of the law, but its outworking. Wright would stress that Jesus is calling his followers to embody Israel's true vocation, to live as light to the nations. Exceeding the righteousness of the Pharisees means surpassing surface-level piety with wholehearted devotion. Jesus as interpreter of the law. Jesus as the second Moses, a title also given to Ezra and later to Rabbi Akiba and Maimonides, is now showing his people what it means to live out the Torah. He is not discarding it, but moving beyond mere legal requirements to look at the spiritual and ethical depths that undergird the outward requirements. He will do so by providing 6 antitheses. Overview. What are the 6 antitheses? The 6 antitheses are found in Matthew 5:21 through 48, and they are structured around contrast between traditional interpretations of the Torah, you have heard, and Jesus' authoritative instructions, but I say to you. He gives us 6 antitheses, 1 on anger and murder, the 2nd on lust and adultery, the 3rd on divorce, the 4th on oaths, the 5th on retaliation, and the 6th on loving our enemies. They're called antitheses not because Jesus contradicts the law, but because he challenges conventional or surface-level interpretations. In Matthew 5:17, he explicitly says, he has not come to abolish the Torah or the prophets, but to fulfill them. What is Jesus doing in these teachings? 1. Deepening the law's intent. Jesus is not replacing the Torah, but intensifying and internalizing it. He moves from external behavior, such as murder and adultery, to internal disposition, anger, and lust, showing that righteousness is a matter of the heart as well as action. 2. Forming a kingdom people. Jesus is creating a distinct community, a people whose holiness reflects the character of God. These teachings go beyond legalism and create a way of life that embodies mercy, reconciliation, integrity, and radical love. 3. Reclaiming the prophetic heart of the Torah. Like the prophets, Jesus insists that religious devotion must match moral integrity. The antitheses are ethical, relational, and communal, focused not just on avoiding sin, but on cultivating wholeness and holiness. Connection to the rabbinic tradition. It's important to emphasize that Jesus is not a lone moral teacher breaking away from Judaism. Rather, he is functioning within wider Jewish community, within the wider context, specifically a context of Torah interpretation. In this sense, he is doing something deeply Jewish. 1. Halakhic dialogue. Jesus' formula, you have heard it said, but I say to you, resembles rabbinic debate, where different schools of interpretation, such as Hillel and Shammai, debated the meaning of Torah. In fact, in rabbinic literature, it's common to find phrases like, it has been taught, but Rabbi so-and-so says. The earlier sages said, but I say to you. Jesus is engaging in authoritative halakhic interpretation. He is not diminishing the Torah, but asserting his messianic authority to interpret it. Number 2. Building a fence around the law. Rabbinic tradition includes the principle of making a fence around the Torah. Pirkei Avot 1:1, meaning that to avoid breaking a law, one should stay far away from its edge. Jesus' teachings on anger, lust, and oath echo this. He calls disciples to avoid even attitudes and situations that could lead to sin. Number 3, ethics of the heart. Well, some versions of Judaism in Jesus' time emphasized external observance. Others, especially the prophets and later the rabbis, also stressed intention and motivation. Jesus stands in this tradition, aligning with texts like, Deuteronomy 6:5, you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart. Isaiah 29:13, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far away from me. Number 4, new Moses, new Torah. By offering these teachings from a mountain, Jesus is cast in Matthew's Gospel as a new Moses. Just as Moses delivered the Torah from Mount Sinai, Jesus delivers his fulfilled interpretation from the mountain, intensifying the demands of the covenant life and calling Israel back to her vocation. Summary. What do these antitheses mean? They are not rejections of the Torah, but intensifications of it. Jesus moves from legal minimalism to inner transformation. They reflect the rabbinic practice of interpretation and ethical deepening. They form the ethical framework for the kingdom of heaven, a community shaped by mercy, faithfulness, and love. Let's look at each. Murder and anger, Matthew 5:21-26. You have heard it said to those of ancient times, you shall not murder. But I say to you that if you're angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. So when you're offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there and go and be reconciled. Then come back and present your gift on the altar. Dean Kingsbury. Kingsbury would highlight Matthew's narrative portrayal of Jesus as the authoritative teacher, deepening, not discarding the law. Jesus contrasts surface obedience, you shall not murder, with a deeper demand, transformation of the heart. Kingsbury would see this as a part of Matthew's larger agenda. Jesus is forming a community whose righteousness is not performative, but authentic. The emphasis on reconciliation fits Matthew's community focus. See Matthew 18. Amy-Jill Levine. Levine would point out that Jesus is not rejecting the Torah, but intensifying its ethical demand in the prophetic tradition. Rabbinic Judaism also emphasized the dangers of anger. See Pirkei Avot 1:17. Silence is a fence around wisdom. She would note how Jesus ties religious ritual, altar offerings, to interpersonal justice, something the prophets like Isaiah and Amos also stressed. For Levine, this reflects a deeply Jewish moral concern. You cannot worship God while harboring hatred for your neighbor. Matthew 5:27-30, adultery and lust. You have heard it said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you, everyone who looks at a woman to lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out, throw it away. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. What is Jesus doing here? Jesus is moving beyond the surface level reading of the seventh commandment, you shall not commit adultery, Exodus 20:14, and addressing the deeper desire, the intent that gives rise to sin. He is not simply raising the standard, he is reframing righteousness around integrity of heart. Here's what Jesus is teaching. Lust is a heart issue. Jesus equates the internal act of intentional lust with the external act of adultery. This isn't about involuntary attraction or aesthetic appreciation. It's about desiring someone in a way that objectifies and degrades them. 2. Sin must be confronted radically. The eye and the hand imagery is hyperbolic, but serious. Do whatever it takes to remove what leads you to sin. Better to lose something you value than to lose your soul. 3. Desires shape destiny. Jesus is not content with behavioral compliance. He calls for inward transformation because he is forming a people whose relationships are marked by purity, trust, and respect. Rabbinic background and connections. Fencing in the Torah. The early sages said, make a fence around the Torah. Jesus' teachings fit this idea. he doesn't just prohibit adultery. He warns against the desires that can lead to adultery. This was not unique to Jesus. Some rabbis also warned that gazing at a woman could lead to sin. 2. Holiness and the heart. Rabbinic Judaism often emphasized the importance of kavana, intention or heart orientation. In worship and ethics, Jesus applies this not only to prayer, but to personal purity. The Yetzer Hara, or the animal desires, the evil inclination. In Jewish thought, the Yetzer Hara is the impulse that leads people towards sin. Rabbinic teaching held that while the evil inclination is real, people must take practical steps to restrain it, such as avoiding places of temptation. Jesus aligns with this framework, but intensifies it by saying that the mere look of lust is already adultery. Hyperbole in teaching. Jesus' use of dramatic imagery, such as plucking out the eye or cutting off the hand, fits the common Jewish rhetoric device called kal v'homar, how much more. And the use of exaggeration for moral seriousness, while not meant literally, it underscores how seriously he takes sin. Matthew 5:31-32, on divorce. It was also said, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce. But I say to you, anyone that divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. This is one of the most concise but controversial teachings of Jesus. Let's unpack its meaning, consider the historical and rabbinic context, and hear what our panel dialogue partners might say. What is Jesus doing in this teaching? 1. Jesus references Deuteronomy 24:1-4, which permits divorce if a husband finds something objectionable about his wife. 2. Jesus then narrows the ground for divorce to one reason, unchastity, the Greek word porneia, a broad term often understood as sexual immorality or marital unfaithfulness. 3. He declares that divorce outside of that context leads to adultery, both for the woman and for the man who marries her. This represents an intensification of the Torah's concern for marital faithfulness and reflects Jesus' larger concern for relational integrity, mutual fidelity, and covenant justice. Rabbinic background and first century context. 1. Debate between Hillel and Shammai. In Jesus' time, there was a well-known debate among Jewish rabbis about the grounds permitting divorce. The house of Shammai, the stricter school, said that divorce could only happen for serious sexual misconduct. The house of Hillel, the more lenient school of interpretation, allowed divorce for almost anything, including burning dinner. Jesus clearly aligns with Shammai's view, but his reasoning is even more theologically grounded, rooted in Genesis and God's design for marriage. 2. The role of the certificate of divorce. Deuteronomy 24 allowed divorce with a written certificate, which was intended to protect the woman by allowing her to remarry. However, by Jesus' day, some had turned this provision into a license for easy unilateral divorce, especially by men. Jesus criticizes this distortion. 3. Gender and social justice. In the patriarchal world of the first century, divorce was heavily skewed in favor of men. Jesus' teaching protects vulnerable women who could be shamed, impoverished, or left socially exposed by arbitrary divorce. He reframes the issue as a matter of justice, not convenience. For this one, we will let Amy-Jill Levine and N.T. Wright weigh in. Amy-Jill Levine. Levine would highlight that Jesus is not introducing a new commandment out of nowhere, but is participating in a live Jewish debate. She'd also point out that Jesus' teaching limits male privilege and aligns with the prophetic tradition that denounced exploitation. She might note that while Jesus elevates faithfulness, Jewish law also sought to preserve dignity through lawful remarriage. N.T. Wright. N.T. Wright would see this as a part of Jesus' kingdom vision that restores creation's order. Divorce was a symptom of hard hearts. Jesus now inaugurates a people in whom God's original design for lifelong faithfulness is being renewed. This is not legalistic, but restorative. Matthew 5:33 through 37. Laws and oaths. You have heard it said to those of ancient times, you shall not swear falsely. But I say to you, do not swear at all. Let your word be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything more than this comes from the evil one. This teaching challenges the use of oaths in everyday speech and insists on integrity that renders oaths unnecessary. Let's explore what Jesus means, how it connects to the Old Testament and Jewish tradition, and what our panel of theological dialogue partners might say. What is Jesus teaching? He quotes and combines several Old Testament laws. Leviticus 19:12, you shall not swear falsely by my name. Deuteronomy 23:21, when you make a vow to the Lord, do not delay in fulfilling it. Exodus 20, verse 7, you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Jesus prohibits casual oath-taking, even oaths by heaven or by earth or by Jerusalem. 3. He calls for such honesty in speech that one's yes or no should be sufficient. Anything more suggests the need to convince or manipulate. Rabbinic context and background. 1. Oaths in Torah and daily life. The Torah permitted and regulated oaths, especially those made in God's name. See Numbers 30, verse 2, and Deuteronomy 6, verse 13. However, in later Jewish practice, people developed elaborate formulas to distinguish between binding and non-binding oaths. For example, swearing by the temple might not be as binding, but by the gold of the temple was even more binding. Number 2, Jesus' critique echoes the rabbis. Jesus' concern reflects a broader Jewish ethical concern, that oaths were being used to disguise dishonesty. The Mishnah in Shavuot and Nadarim contains extensive discussions on valid and invalid vows. Jesus, like many Pharisaic teachers, wants integrity to be internal, not a matter of technicality. Number 3, truthfulness as divine attribute. Psalms 15, verse 4. Who may dwell in your holy hill? One answer, he who keeps an oath even when it hurts. Jesus' teaching lines up with the prophetic tradition. God desires truth in our inward being, Psalm 51:6, not just in our outward performance. For this passage, we will turn to John Howard Yoder and to Rudolf Bultmann. John Howard Yoder. Yoder would see this as a rejection of systems of power that rely on manipulation, coercion, and persuasion through oath-taking. For him, oaths signal a breakdown in trust. Jesus calls for a community where speech is simple, honest, and dependable, where people don't need to swear because they live in truth. Rudolf Bultmann. Bultmann would interpret this as an existential demand. Be someone who speaks truthfully without pretense. Oaths are a way of hiding the fractured self. Jesus calls disciples to live in openness and transparency where one's words align with one's inner reality. Matthew 5:38 through 42, the fifth antithesis. You have heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give them the cloak as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Give to everyone who begs from you, and do not refuse anyone who wants to borrow from you. Part 1. The Lex Talionis. The original meaning of the Hebrew Bible and Rabbinic tradition. Origin and intent. The phrase, an eye for an eye, appears in Exodus 21, verses 23 through 25, Leviticus 24, 19 through 20, and Deuteronomy 19:21. The principle, known as the lex talionis, was not designed to promote personal revenge or vigilante justice. Rather, it was a principle of proportional justice. It was meant to ensure that punishment matched the crime, that it did not exceed it. It restrained excessive retribution and promoted judicial fairness. It was to be administered in court settings, not by private individuals. Rabbinic interpretation. By the time of Jesus, many Jewish scholars, including those cited in the Talmud, Bava Kama, interpreted lex talionis symbolically. Instead of literal retaliation, the principle was fulfilled through monetary compensation. Damages were awarded for pain, loss of income, healing cost, and public shame. Scholarly consensus. Modern Jewish and Christian scholars widely affirm that lex talionis was an early legal advancement aimed at limiting vengeance and ensuring justice, not encouraging a tit-for-tat violence. So Jesus is not critiquing a primitive or harsh law. He's engaging with a law that is already aimed at justice and fairness. Part 2, Jesus' teaching going beyond just justice. From restraint to radical mercy. Jesus affirms the value of justice, but moves beyond it. His kingdom is not built merely on fairness, but on surprising, grace-filled love. Do not resist an evildoer. It does not mean passive submission, but refusal to meet evil on its own terms. Each example Jesus gives is a scenario of public shame or legal coercion. His response is not weakness, but moral defiance through creative generosity. The 4 illustrations. Turn the other cheek. Don't return insult for insult. Maintain dignity and offer grace in return. Give your cloak. Go beyond legal obligation. Expose unjust systems through overgenerosity. 3. Go the second mile. Roman law allowed soldiers to force civilians to carry burdens. Jesus says exceed their coercion freely. 4. Give to those who ask. Practical, radical generosity without calculating what you'll get back. What Jesus is not doing. He's not contradicting or abolishing the Torah. He's not opposing Jewish ethics. His teaching aligns with the prophets who prioritize mercy, justice, and transformation of the heart. He's not saying evil should go unchallenged. He is redefining how his disciples are to challenge it. For this passage, we will let John Howard Yoder and John Wesley speak. John Howard Yoder. Yoder would find this passage central to his theology. In the politics of Jesus, he emphasizes that Jesus is not offering a private ethic of inner peace, but a public, social alternative to the violent logic of empire. Do not resist. The Greek is antisthenes. Does not mean passive surrender. It means rejecting violence and creating a space for reconciliation. Each example is an active, embodied form of loving our enemy. John Wesley. John Wesley saw this whole passage as a part of what it meant to live the holy life. In his Sermon on the Mount, he interpreted these verses as requiring meekness, patience, and unshakable love. To resist evil by suffering it in love is a mark of Christian maturity. Grace empowers believers to absorb injury without returning it and to bless where others curse. Matthew 5:43 through 48. Love your enemies. You have heard it said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be the children of your Father in heaven. For he makes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends the rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. What is Jesus saying? 1. Quoting the law and popular interpretation. The first part, love your neighbor, is from Leviticus 19:18. But hate your enemy is not found in the Torah at all. It likely reflects a popular attitude, perhaps drawn from ideas like the imprecatory Psalms or common sectarian thinking like the Qumran, son of light and son of darkness. Jesus is called to love our enemies. Jesus' commands, he commands not just tolerance, but active love, demonstrated in prayer, compassion, and solidarity. This is not about feelings, but about actions that seek the good of others. 3, the reason. God loves without distinction. The rationale is deeply theological. To love enemies is to reflect the character of God who blesses both the righteous and the unrighteous. 4, the goal. Perfection. Teleos. Be perfect means to be whole, mature, and complete like God, consistent through and through, whose love is unbroken by tribalism or resentment. This is about moral and relational maturity, not flawlessness. Background in the Jewish tradition. The Shema. Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 5. Love for God and neighbor is the central command of Jewish ethics. However, loving our enemy, as Jesus defines it, is a striking expansion of the Torah. 6. Leviticus 19:18 in context. The full verse says, "You shall not take vengeance or bear a grudge, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Jesus presses this even further. Love must extend beyond the covenant community. 7. The Qumran contrast. Some Jewish groups, such as the Essenes, explicitly taught, love the sons of light, but hate the sons of darkness. Jesus counters this exclusivity. 8. Proverbs 25:21. If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat. So there is a biblical precedent for loving our enemy, but Jesus makes it central, not exceptional. For this last section, we will let Dietrich Bonhoeffer and John Wesley have the last word. Dietrich Bonhoeffer. In The Cost of Discipleship, Bonhoeffer sees this as the essence of Christian visibility. The disciple cannot hide behind ethical loopholes. Loving the enemy is not optional. It is cruciform living. Bonhoeffer writes, "This love for the enemy is the touchstone of discipleship." John Wesley. John Wesley viewed this as the pinnacle of sanctification. The pure heart, filled with perfect love, no longer harbors resentment or partiality. In his sermon on Christian perfection, Wesley says that loving our enemies is the sure sign that grace has been completed in our soul. Questions and discussion and reflections. 1, in what ways does Jesus' claim that he came to fulfill the law and the prophets reshape your understanding of the relationship between the Old Testament and the New Testament? 2, how does viewing Jesus as the new Moses change the way we read the Sermon on the Mount? What parallels do you see between Moses on Mount Sinai and Jesus on the Mount of Galilee? 3, Jesus' reinterpretation of the law often intensifies its ethical demands by moving from outward behavior to inward disposition. What does this tell you about the kind of community Jesus is forming? 4, how do Jesus' teachings in Matthew 5 challenge common Christian misunderstandings of the Old Testament law as being obsolete, harsh, or legalistic? 5, if Jesus is both the fulfillment of Israel's story and the embodiment of Torah, what does it mean for us as his followers to live as a covenant people shaped by mercy, justice, and love?